Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. I have almost 15 years of experience moving goods. Enough time to familiarize yourself with almost every deserted roadway in the Southwest. Name's Colorado Springs-based Rick Homan. I was transporting diesel generators from Grand Junction to a construction site near Escalante tonight. It was a lengthy, desolate section along State Route 24 that cut south into the high desert of Utah. I entered Utah between 4 and 11. They quickly refueled in Green River and headed south. Anyone who has driven that distance will attest to its remoteness, miles of stony desolation with strange shadows cast over the road by the moonlight. Just me, my rig, and whatever kept scuttling off into the brush at the edge of the headlights. No traffic, no mobile reception. I went over a cow gate about 30 miles south of the turnoff after 30 minutes. At that moment, I noticed him standing slightly off my shoulder, obviously a male. I initially thought he was a hitchhiker. Quite normal on these deserted roads. He did not, however, alert me. He simply watched the truck go by while remaining still and keeping their arms straight. I caught a glimpse of pants, a white undershirt, and shabby boots in that brief burst of headlights. Nothing more, I whispered to myself, clutching the wheel a little more tightly. No jacket, no backpack, just a silent figure who is totally out of place in the middle of nowhere. Hitchhikers didn't typically give me the creeps, but something about his solitude and stillness felt strange. I ignored it as my caravan hummed behind me, its wheels rolling steadily over the road. A local drunk, perhaps someone lost it, but I continued. If I didn't have to, I never came out here. I spotted him again around 25 minutes and 20 kilometers later, next to a dried-up ravine that cut off from the road. It was the same guy, I promise, the same posture, the same attire, the same eerie silence. I brushed my headlights over him once more, standing erect and still. There was no indication that he had even noticed my truck screaming by. I looked in the side mirrors, but I couldn't find anything, not a parked car, a motorcycle, or even a bicycle. On both sides, there is nothing but dark desert. Not feasible, I exclaimed out loud, breaking the quiet. No one could run that far in that short a time, even at top speed. I must have been dreaming. Fatigue from the boring roadway is starting to set in. However, I had previously worked considerably longer shifts, so hallucinations weren't a problem. Not in this manner. My epidermis, it pricked. I let cool desert air into the cab by rolling down the window a few inches. I maintained a straight line of sight. There was only wind and road noise, no music or radio conversation. I kept thinking about the picture. The desert was deserted, and the man stood still, standing beside the road ahead, arms down, waiting, silently in the dark. I continued to drive, feeling apprehensive now, partly expecting to see him again. I thought it was time to relax after traveling about 20 meters further along Route 24. I have to record a few hours of sleep by law, and despite the fact that witnessing that man twice had disturbed me, fatigue was infiltrating. Near South Canville Mesa, there was a dirt pullout designated as a rest place. I had previously used this barren location, just a rusty trash can, and faded placards that are hardly visible in the dark. No lights. I turned off the engine as I pulled in and sat silently for a minute, listening to the truck's hot metal tick and cool. I looked out the windscreen, allowing my eyes to get used to the almost pitch black surroundings. Miles of flat scrub on far-off rocky outcroppings, silhouetted by moonlight, were all that moved. I pushed myself to relax by reclining in my chair and closing my eyes. Normally, it was simple to go asleep, but tonight it seemed like every sound was louder. Something faintly scraped against the undercarriage in the wind outside. The sound of my own breathing felt out of place. I felt tense, and even though I was tired, I couldn't fall asleep. The tapping then started. Just behind my cab, there were 3 gentle, rhythmic taps equally spaced against the metal side. I gasped as it suddenly sprang open. Immediately, I rationalized. Debris from the road and rocks that the wind has stirred up. However, the sound quickly ended and was replaced by silence as I listened more closely. Even outside, it's too quiet. Leaning forward, I reached for my torch from the control panel and cautiously descended from the cab. At first glance, I noticed nothing strange when I swept the beam around the dirt clearing. Then I froze and moved to the side of the truck. Footprints. There are new, distinct footsteps in the fine dust that surrounds my rig, just the outline of toes and heels pressed precisely into the soil, barefoot, with no tread. My stomach twisted in agony. I frantically swung the torch about, but the desert had no track. There was only a circle around my truck, as though someone had appeared and then disappeared, with no footsteps coming or going. All of my instincts told me to leave. Ignore the rest period. Ignore the rules. I hurried back into the cab, turned on the engine, and closed both doors. I saw the pull-out fade in the mirrors behind me as I backed onto the freeway, my heart thumping terribly in my chest. After picking up another load headed back east and unloading the generators in Escalante, I found myself back on Route 24 a few hours later. Once again, it was close to midnight, and as the same section of road came into view in the headlights, every muscle in my body tensed. This time, it started with the CB radio. I was startled by a crackling flash of static, the type that occurs when someone presses the microphone without saying anything. Curiously, I looked down at the radio and turned the knob to make the signal more clear. My own voice, scratchy and distorted, came back through the speaker as I listened. Large loads. As they ascend a hill, my blood froze. Miles away, hours previously, I had said the exact same thing. My voice was strained with nervousness as I grabbed the microphone off its clip. Who's outside? Name yourself. Static gave me a mocking, vacuous hiss in return. No answer. Before I could gather my thoughts, my cab's dome light started clicking, on and off on its own. My heart pounded. Panic crept in. I rummaged around the fuse box under the dash, looking for anything loose or a sensible reason, but everything was there, safe and undisturbed. My attention was drawn back to the highway by a sudden movement in my side mirror. Something attracted my attention. I saw a shadowy figure dart by my trailer's tail. Too rapid to be human, swift and unable to slow down. My breathing became labored. I pressed the throttle, making the vehicle grow louder as it drove at 70 miles per hour on that deserted highway. Disregarding all speed limits, I vowed never to turn around again. Keeping my hands firmly on the steering wheel and my eyes fixed forward as I sped towards Hanksville and whatever protection its lights may provide. The sporadic lights of Hanksville were weakly visible against the immense expanse of desolation surrounding the highway at about 3 in the morning. Even if the town hardly qualified, I had never been so glad to see civilization. As I maneuvered the truck into the well-lit hollow mountain petrol station, my hands trembled a little. A little area set straight into a cliff of sandstone. Every nook and cranny was illuminated by the fluorescent lights above. The glaring light seemed reassuring instead of annoying for once. I turned off the engine, parked directly beneath the brightest security light, and sat motionless for just listening for a few minutes. I was too tense to think about sleeping. My heart pounded as if it were about to explode from my ribcage, and every creak of metal and hiss of cooling equipment shot shockwaves through my chest. I felt a twinge of powerlessness as I looked at the station's closed convenience store. The only human presence was a clerk's car parked at the far end of the lot, cold and empty, and it wouldn't open for another 2 hours. However, I was at least not in the dark alone. I felt somewhat reassured by the security cameras that were positioned high on the rock face. I'm confident whatever had followed me here wouldn't want a chance being discovered now. As I steadied myself by taking deep breaths, I heard a single, piercing tap coming from my passenger side mirror. My eyes shot to the mirror as my breath held in an instant. I made myself avoid looking out. My entire body begged me to start the truck and go somewhere else, anywhere but here. However, there was no safer place to go. 4 miles, this was the sole lighted refuge. And I had a feeling that my greatest chance of surviving the night was to remain where I was. Minutes passed painfully slowly as I waited in tense stillness until the eastern sky started to lighten and the far-off desert was covered in pale streaks. The station clerk finally showed up as dawn was coming. A tired middle-aged man turns on extra lights and unlocks the business. It was like waking from a nightmare when I saw him, and I hurried out of the taxi, almost stumbling as adrenaline and fatigue fought inside of me. He gave me an odd look, but he readily consented when I explained what had happened and asked if we could watch the security tape. Gazing into a grainy black screen, we stood behind the counter. A white screen, rapidly playing back hours of video. Not even when the mirror had sounded that last tap. No movement, no person surrounding my rig, other than my own nervous motions inside the cab. The lot was deserted all night. "Are you certain you spotted someone outside?" Softly, the clerk inquired. I gave a sad nod. I could still clearly see the footprint in my mind. Carefully, he added, "You're not the first trucker to say something like that. Perhaps you should speak with the sheriff before you go out again." I was in front of the Wayne County Sheriff's office an hour later, telling a constable about my incident while discreetly taking notes. He appeared resigned rather than astonished when I was done. Without saying a word, he guided me to a back wall that was haphazardly plastered with documents, maps, and corkboards. One of them was a handwritten list with a clear label. Phantom sightings on Route 24, dozens of times, days, and driver names with brief notes attached. Lost, quit trucking, or abandoned rig. At the bottom, he put my name, the date, and a brief message. I made it out safely by staying with the truck. You made the correct decision. It's best not to be alone in the dark with whatever that is out there, he added softly. Think, Rick, numb and worn out. I thanked him and made my way slowly back to my truck, knowing 2 things for sure. I would never haul another cargo down Route 24 once again, and I will never forget the guy standing still by the side of the road, waiting silently in the dark. Story 2. I have been a truck driver for about half of my life, 15 years transporting reefer freight, often at night, between Boise and Portland. But no matter how much experience you have, some roads never lose their edge. Dead Man Pass, or Cabbage Hill as the locals call it, was one of them, earning its grim nickname with a brutal history of rollovers and wrecks. The summer months were made bearable by cooler roads, less traffic and fewer hassles. You know exactly what I mean if you've driven I-84 through the Blue Mountains. The steep grade, the tight turns, the erratic summer rock slides, all of these things made you tense, especially as the clock struck 3 in the morning. It was mid-July, and the humidity was so high that even the darkness felt sticky. My refrigerated trailer was loaded with 31,000 pounds of frozen meats headed for Portland, and I had left Baker City and roughly to 4:45 a.m. Border Collie Scout was curled up on the passenger seat, and the road was sufficiently deserted to allow me to relax, if only a little. Then, at about 3:30, my headlights spotted something strange just past milepost 127. An old white SUV parked ahead at an awkward angle against the guardrail, its hazard lights blinking silently into the darkness, and a man standing by the shoulder. frantically waving one of those reflective emergency triangles. My instinct told me to continue. As I shifted into park, Scout lifted his head, ears perked up, because dogs always sense trouble before they do. Dead Man Pass wasn't the place to play hero, but something about his desperate movements made me take my foot off the gas and slow down, carefully pulling towards the shoulder about 50 yards in front of his car, keeping a safe distance in case something felt off. I rolled down my window halfway and peered nervously into the side mirror, watching the man who, rather than coming to my truck, stayed motionless behind his SUV and made an anxious signal for me to get out and come over. There was no shouting, no explanation. Just under the dim light of my taillights, I made frantic, wordless motions. "Hey, are you okay back there?" I yelled as I pointed my torch out the window, and for the first time, his face and my gut knotted as the bright beam cut through the shadows. It was lifeless, emotionless, and staring directly at me without any expression, as if he had forgotten how a human face should function. It wasn't panicked, thankful, or relieved. His jeans were torn down one leg, and his clothes were dirty. He remained without moving, his hands still outstretched towards me like a strange statue, and I felt a chill go down my spine as my entire body begged me to get up and move. "You got a phone?" I yelled again, buying myself another second to decide. He didn't respond, didn't move, didn't even blink. The triangle dangled loosely from his other hand, its reflectors gleaming faintly each time it caught my lights. I glanced at Scout, whose hackles were raised, eyes locked on the stranger. "Nope," I muttered, "not at all." I put the rig back in gear and moved slowly at first, feigning to move farther down the shoulder. I saw him standing still in the mirror, lit up by my red brake lights, and then I punched the gas and felt a wave of relief wash over me as I quickly shrank into the darkness and left the unsettling figure behind. A sharp, high-pitched alert from the truck system, trailer door open, interrupted my thoughts. I tried telling myself that the man was drunk or high, possibly lost or hurt and confused, but radio reception here was notoriously spotty. I felt a little more at ease, but still tense and shaken. I felt a chill run through me. I remembered locking and latching it before I left Baker City, something I usually double-cheesed out of habit. I tried to calm myself down and thought it was probably a malfunctioning sensor, because it had happened once before, months ago. Nothing big, but a persistent apprehension wouldn't go away. So I looked in my mirror once more, half expecting the man or his SUV to resurface on the road behind me. The blackness remained empty and unending, and I continued driving, feeling oddly despite the enormous steel rig below me. I was vulnerable. I didn't know it at the time, but stopping at Dead Man Pass had started something that I couldn't yet comprehend and would soon regret stopping to discover. It took me around a mile to realize something wasn't right. Scout was pacing nervously across the passenger seat, whining quietly, his ears flat against his head. Scout wasn't normally skittish. Years of traveling had made him as steady as any truck dog could be. The truck felt strange, almost like the trailer was fishtailing slightly, just enough to be noticeable, but not so much that I initially thought it was due to wind gusts. My nerves weren't calmed by seeing him shake. My dashboard illuminated once more, and the weight sensors in the trailer's axle system suddenly spiked. My load had increased by almost 500 pounds, but it quickly dropped back to normal. It was odd, but not impossible. Erroneous readings occasionally occurred on lengthy corridors, particularly in areas like the Blue Mountains, but this one felt different, so I pushed myself to take a deep, steady breath and tried the radio, calling any trucker within a few miles. Static crackled for a few seconds before another vehicle answered. No on the wind. I inquired if anyone was westbound around Dead Man Pass picking up crosswinds or strange road conditions. "It's quiet out here. What's going on?" "Lisa, trailers are acting strangely. Sensors are bouncing around." I answered in a nonchalant manner. "Probably nothing. The other trucker laughed dryly over the radio. "Be careful out there. Could be those Cabbage Hill ghosts. Just jumpy, I guess." Didn't laugh. I kept glancing at the side mirrors, closely observing the trailer. Scout was now huddled against the seat, his eyes wide. This seemed illogical, but his response made me realize that it wasn't just paranoia. He had experienced a lot of bad weather, bad roads, and even encounters with animals, but he had never behaved in this manner. Maybe the cargo moved a little when I pulled onto the shoulder, or perhaps I hadn't locked the caravan firmly, even though I had a clear memory of doing so. I forced myself to keep driving, trying to think of normal explanations, anything to keep from admitting the dread that was settling in my stomach. My heart rate increased, sweat dampening my palms against the steering wheel, and the sensor jumped again, giving me a brief 600-pound spike before falling back down. It felt like something big was moving around inside, changing the weight distribution in an unpredictable way. "Scout, what's back there, buddy?" Knowing he couldn't respond, I whispered, but fervently hoping he could. I decided to call Oregon Doe's 24-hour hotline, took the next exit, and requested an immediate inspection about 10 miles from Pendleton. The dispatcher sounded doubtful, but agreed to meet me at the eastbound way station just outside town. And I didn't care how it turned out. I pulled to a stop at the deserted way station, motor idling softly in the pre-dawn silence. And then I grabbed my hefty torch and cautiously unlocked the cab door before stepping out. Scout hesitated to follow, lowering himself deeper into the seat, but I needed someone else to confirm what I couldn't explain. The night air felt abnormally heavy and oppressive, and I felt my throat constrict. This was another ominous indication. I hurried to the back of the caravan, heart pounding, and pointed the torch at the latch, which was open, not broken or damaged, but unlatched, dangling a little jar. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared into the narrow darkness between the trailer doors, and although I should have been relieved that nothing was immediately apparent, my dread grew as I realized that the lock itself was still firmly in place, confirming my earlier suspicion that whatever had happened here had begun inside my trailer rather than outside. The slightest odor drifted from the open gap, earthy and rich, like new soil flipped over from a grave. I instinctively stepped back and swung the trailer doors open, my torch beam sweeping across stacked pallets that appeared to be undisturbed and tightly wrapped, until I noticed a broken pallet board near the middle of the trailer floor, splintered, as if it had been crushed by something heavy. The aluminium walls near it were gouged by odd scars, deep, erratic scratches that could only have been caused by something big and strong. Scout was shaking, so I turned back towards the cab, half running now, and climbed inside. 15 minutes later, the Oregon Dock pickup rolled into the way station, headlights slicing across my windscreen, momentarily blinding me. I locked both cab doors and waited for the inspection crew, eyes anxiously focused on the darkened mirrors, wondering what exactly had climbed into my caravan at Dead Men Pass and where it had gone. When two inspectors emerged with heavy-duty flashlights in tow, I descended from my rig with a reluctant Scout at my side as we made our way to the trailer. "You the one who called?" asked the taller inspector, an older guy with a weathered face and a skeptical look. "Yeah, that's something inside isn't right," I murmured, trying to sound steady as the caravan clasp sprang open. Loads shift strangely, spikes in the sensor. "Back there, it's a disaster." Slowly, he nodded, looking at his partner, a younger woman with the weary look of someone who is already regretting working the night shift. They headed for the back doors, and she waved me over. I rumbled in my stomach as I followed. The air appeared heavier than before, with a smell of moist earth and moss, when the inspector fully opened the caravan. Something out of place, like wet soil pulled in from a great distance, but not exactly a rod. The inspector's casual skepticism quickly faded as they exchanged a perplexed look. With flashlights crisscrossing the aluminium walls, they gingerly entered the trailer, exposing the deep, jagged scratches that went almost waist-high along both sides. The woman's voice became abruptly tense with anxiety as she said, "You got an animal loose back here?" I gave a short shake of my head. "No, only Baker City frozen meats." Before I departed, the doors were secured and latched. Later on, somewhere on Dead Man Pass, something got in. The senior inspector bent over and shone his light on the shattered pallet close to the middle. Like matchsticks, splintered wood was strewn all over the floor. His eyes narrowed as he looked back at me. And there was no sound heard. No banging. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Nothing," I replied truthfully. "Only sensor warnings, slight trailer sway." As soon as I saw, I stopped. I took another step back, the trailer's heavy weight pressing down on me. I had a feeling I shouldn't be inside. Scout was pacing impatiently outdoors. We approached cautiously, as the younger inspector, who had gone more inside the caravan, yelled, "Hey, come see this." Beams coming together on an odd hill close to the rear axle. There was a mass of newly disturbed, dark dirt against the aluminium floor. It was obviously not native to this area of Oregon, since bits of grass and moss stuck out of it. The older inspector knelt to study it, whispering, "What the hell?" Nearer. His face wrinkled in bewilderment. He carefully poked at the soil. I felt ill to my stomach. My palms started to perspire, and the stench made me lightheaded. Where did this even come from? Maybe it dug through the floor somehow, but I don't know. All I can tell you is that something climbed in after I stopped. It's impossible, he interjected abruptly. Trailer floors are reinforced. Steel beams, aluminium plating. These appear recent. Whatever it was, it wanted out desperately. He stood suddenly, flashing the light upward, lighting the walls once again. His voice was quiet, but serious, as he traced one of the gouges with his finger. He didn't respond, so they both walked past me and headed for the back doors. "We're going to check your dashcam footage," the older inspector said firmly, gesturing for me to follow. I quickly made my way back to the cab, shivering as if cold. Scout climbed inside to get the SD card from the camera. I calmly handed them the disc and watched as the younger inspector loaded it into a tablet. She rapidly sifted through the footage, locating the timestamp just before 3:30 a.m. when the image reappeared. I was already driving away, the road stretching ahead as if nothing had ever happened, and the video was clear at first, my headlights piercing the darkness, everything normal, until abruptly, without explanation, the screen went completely blank, leaving nothing but blackness for almost 7 full minutes. The screen, puzzled, "You stopped somewhere else." "No, only Dead Guy Pass," I said in a low voice. "But now what?" As I noticed a stranded driver beckoning me down. Her voice was sharp as she pressed. I took a deep breath and regained my composure. The video now shows nothing, no man, no SUV, no record, and I stopped completely. He said, "Listen," after they exchanged awkward glances. "We'll file a report, send this footage up the chain, but officially this is going to read like a break-in," he said. "Keep it easy, don't you?" I gave a numb nod. "Okay, easy." After they went back into their truck and promised a follow-up that neither of us knew would happen, I remained in my cab for a while, trying to make sense of it, while Scout snuggled up next to me and finally calmed down. I concluded I'd seen enough. The inspectors were probably right. This would go unsolved, neatly filed away as a simple break-in. I drove to Portland in a fog, the caravan dragging behind me, feeling heavier than ever. After unloading, I refused any more lonely nights through the mountains. Whatever got into my caravan at Dead Man Pass wasn't searching for cargo. It was searching for a way out, and I provided it one. It was just another peculiarity lost amid hundreds of highway incidents, but I knew better. Story 3: My dad, a long-haul truck driver named Ray Martinez, had been at our family's annual 4th of July reunion since I could remember, and he missed it for the first and only time in my life when I was 13 years old. Every year, We gathered at my uncle's property just outside of Billings, Montana, where we grilled burgers, lit fireworks, and stayed up late telling stories around the bonfire. In 2011, he was traveling from Cheyenne, Wyoming to Bozeman, Montana, with a load of refrigerated produce. Normally, he would take the interstate through Casper and Billings, but due to wildfires, he had to drive north through Cody, and then west along Route 212, the Beartooth Highway, which was more dangerous, lonelier, and longer, but it was the only open way. He said he would get home by July 3rd. My mother covered her anxiety with fake smiles, but even at 13, I could sense the tension building. Years later, on a muggy summer night in 2024, Dad finally told me the whole story on our Billings back porch. What he told me explained every silent glance, every hesitant look he'd given Route 212 since that July, as crickets chirped softly and my own children slept inside. His story started just after midnight on July 2nd, 2011, as he made his way down a winding descent along Route 212 near Clabe Lookout, thousands of feet above sea level. The gravel on the road had just been washed off, and the big trailer suddenly swung wide, causing the entire rig to tremble violently. Dad's Freightliner Cascadia slipped off the shoulder and sank into the loose ground and dry bush below, but he was only frightened and unharmed. As he searched for damage, his heart pounded against his chest, and he walked down into dry grass and gravel, torch shaking in his hand, and circled the truck, which was hopelessly stuck, its vast bulk half-tilted, its tires dug deep, the rig embedded in the ground. Dad explained quietly that there was no cell signal up there, that it was the middle of nowhere, that there was no traffic, that there were road closures everywhere because of fires, and that my best option was to wait until morning, flag down anyone who might be passing by, or hike to a ranger station. He then got into his sleeper cab and tried to get some rest, telling himself it was only a setback. However, the truck's engine had cut out sometime during his sleep, leaving the cab dark and silent, and when he woke up at precisely 3:40 a.m., the air was cold enough to see his breath, a stark contrast to the heat he'd expected in July. The dashboard flickered angrily with warning lights, creating eerie shadows inside the cab, and as he slid behind the wheel and turned the key, he heard a metallic shriek that sounded like a grinding sound instead of the familiar roar. Dad stepped back out, the flashlight beam piercing the dust and darkness, and when he lifted the hood, a bitter chemical, he walked around the truck, his eyes searching the darkness surroundings, and he felt his gut clench at what he saw. The oil pan was split apart, as though something sharp had purposefully cut through the metal, and oil trickled down the gravel, combining with coolant and collecting ominously at his feet. He saw bare, human-like, elongated footprints, pressed into the dirt and heading towards the dark wall of trees. I thought maybe someone was stranded. Desperate, Dad told me, shaking his head slowly. But then I heard movement. His heart was thumping now, but not with whirring. Before I could get a good look, it went around behind the trailer. Dad quickly scurried back into the cab, locked the doors and took his pistol from under the seat. He paused in his retelling, taking a long sip from his glass, eyes distant. Whatever it was, he finally moved upright like a man, but faster, more fluid. He sat stiffly in the driver's seat, every nerve on edge, trying to hear anything more than the silence. Minutes passed slowly, and then at 4:12 a.m., he heard slow, methodical footfall moving over the trailer's aluminium roof. He sat motionless as they came to a stop above his head, the metal cracking slightly under their weight, and then there was nothing but silence. Time passed agonizingly as Dad waited, his pistol in sweaty fists, remaining motionless above him. Dad whispered, staring at me with haunted eyes. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't shoot through the roof blind. Couldn't just stay there forever. Finally, fatigue dragged him back into a restless sleep. But sleep was no reprieve. because what followed made it difficult to distinguish between reality, and I woke up suddenly, choking for air, my heart pounding painfully in my chest, the vividness of the nightmare lingering like an oily residue, and my eyes took a moment to adjust to the darkness inside the sleeper cab. And when Dad finally woke up, gasping in terror, he'd come face to face with something he'd spend the next 13 years desperately trying to forget. I was trapped along Route 212, hours away from any real aid, and for a brief moment I had no idea where I was. Then reality set in, and I checked my phone out of habit at 12:08 a.m. It had read for 12 a.m. when I checked it earlier, after hearing footsteps on the roof, but something was off. My thoughts felt sluggish and jumbled, and the darkness outside appeared abnormally thick, soaking up the little glow from the phone screen. I'd wandered through a twisted, impossible forest with trees bent at strange angles and roots nodding, like gnarled dead snakes, feeling as though there were unseen eyes watching from behind every trunk, and in the middle of it all stood a dark totem carved crudely from bleached bones and burned wood. The nightmare itself snagged at the edges of my consciousness. Something tall and wrong had stepped from behind it just before I'd woken up, its face stretching into an expression halfway between agony and a hideous grin. I shivered, pushing the image away, wiping the perspiration from my face, and as I sat up straight, trying to collect myself, I noticed a sudden movement that made my heart lurch. Outside, just past the driver's side window, something moved. I instinctively turned my head and gazed into the darkness, nodding in my gut, and to eyes returned the gaze. The face pressed, it was pale, gaunt, and nearly skeletal against the window, with skin taut across bones below and a straight, unreadable mouth. The proportions were off. The cheekbones were long, the jaw was angled, the brow was too high, and the eyes. My pistol rested on the passenger seat, inches from my hand, and for many heart-stopping seconds, we just gazed at each other. It was dark, reflecting, too broad, and filled with a frightening emptiness that froze me in place. Then, with a rush of adrenaline, my hand flew out, closed around the grip, raised the weapon, and fired, shattering the silence as the window exploded outward in a shower of glass fragments. My ears rang, and I sat stunned for a moment, my breath ragged. I tried to grab it, but my body felt paralyzed. My breath shook as I gently lowered the gun, my pulse still pounding wildly, my ears buzzing horribly, and I looked into the darkness beyond the jagged frame, pistol trembling in my grasp. Nothing, no body, no noises of movement, no blood, just empty darkness and the oppressive silence of the night. Through the broken window, cold mountain air filtered in with a subtle smell of sulfur and burning metal. I glanced at the phone once more, and my blood went cold. The screen read 12:13 a.m., which was just 5 minutes after I had previously looked. Inconceivable. Hours seemed to have gone by. I carefully got up from my seat and looked through the smashed window, my eyes darting around, looking. The earth next to the truck was smooth and untouched. There were no footprints or indications of anything moving. I had seen it plainly, and I knew I hadn't dreamed it. I backed away and sat down into the sleeper bunk, covering my bleeding hand with a rag from under the seat, my mind spinning, my thoughts spiraling. The gravel lay unchanged, as if the figure had never been there at all. Time had stopped making sense, minutes had stretched into hours, and the clock hardly moved. Something incredibly strange was going on, something I couldn't describe. The following hour was spent sitting erect, holding the pistol, and paying close attention to every little sound. Eventually, exhaustion overtook the adrenaline, dragging me uncomfortably towards sleep. I struggled mightily to keep my eyes open, afraid of falling back into that deranged dream, but fatigue took me again, and when I woke up the next day, I wasn't inside the truck, surrounded by trees I didn't recognize. I stood barefoot in the dark, the rocky ground digging sharply into the soreness of my feet, feeling dizzy and queasy as I stared into unknown woods, my heart thumping. I tried to recall how I'd gotten here, and my truck, my only lifeline, was nowhere to be seen. Shivering, I realized I'd left the pistol behind, unarmed and vulnerable, and my pulse quickened as the surrounding trees twisted upward at strange angles, the forest's darkness thick and oppressive, with no sign of familiar roads or landmarks. The landscape was unfamiliar, even after hours of driving through this area. The silence was absolute and suffocating, and the air seemed thick and oppressive. There were no insects chirping, and something heavy was moving through the brush behind Emmy, pacing in measured, methodical silence. It remained low, shifting from side to side, weaving through the underbrush with unnerving speed. I turned swiftly, breathing shallowly, and stared into the darkness. I saw nothing clearly, only glimmers of dark, rapid movement. I raced because instinct took over. Branches ripped at my arms and face as I ran blindly, tears spilling from exhaustion and despair, every breath burning as I jumped fallen logs and skirted trees, desperate to put distance between myself and then, mercifully, I emerged from the trees onto a rough clearing, where a small log cabin stood, barely visible under moonlight filtering through clouds. Smoke curled gently from its chimney, promising shelter, and whatever followed me stumbled, tripped, rode myself, and pressed on through the darkness. Even though my knees were shaking from fatigue, I pushed on out of pure terror and arrived at the porch of the cabin, panting and hammering my fist against the massive wooden door. "Help!" I cried, my voice cracking and resonating hollowly across the clearing. "Please open up." After a few anxious seconds, footsteps shuffled inside, and the door cracked carefully open. An elderly guy emerged, his shotgun securely grasped in aged hands. His eyes narrowed wearily above a grey beard. "What on earth is happening out here?" His eyes scanned the tree line behind me as he demanded harshly. My truck broke down. "Please let me in," I said, my voice trembling. "Something's chasing me. I have no idea what's going on." His eyes scanned me intently, assessing me before he moved away. "Sit," he said, his voice quieter now. "You're safe for now, at least." And he hurried me inside, bolting the door behind us and pointing to a shabby armchair by a roaring wood heater. Still shaking, I fell onto the chair and looked anxiously at the closed door. After carefully setting his shotgun on a table, the elderly guy looked at me thoughtfully and said, "My name is Jonas." I told him everything. I've been out here long enough to know something strange when I see it. He listened silently, his face grim, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, he leaned forward slowly, his voice low and deliberate. "Heard stories all my life," Jonas said. "The crash, the engine shredded without reason, the figure at the window, the lost hours, and the impossible way I'd woken up deep in these woods." He stood, crossing the small cabin to an old wooden shelf lined with books and faded photographs, and carefully took a worn journal from between two heavy objects. "Most people think it's nonsense, hallucinations from altitude or fear, but it's real enough." He woke up miles from their tents with no memory of leaving him. He looked up at me and asked, "Have you heard of the apple carry?" I shook my head silently, my chest constricted with fear. According to old tales, they were here, long before any recognized tribes or settlements. He explained softly, his eyes meeting mine. They were not alone. They made things, summoned them perhaps, or transformed themselves into something else. They're called the wrong ones, mimics. They look human enough to fool you, but they're not. Human, secretive, hidden deep, practice dark things. Things folks stopped whispering about generations ago, he said. I eventually murmured, "Why me?" Jonathan shook his head slowly, his eyes darkened, and he closed the journal slowly, observing my reaction intently. "They don't let go easy once they see you. They distort your memory, twist time, and make it difficult to tell what's real. How can you stop them? Sometimes people approach locations they shouldn't see. Perhaps you drove through the wrong stretch at the wrong time." With a long sigh and drooping shoulders, Jonas spoke gently, "You don't. You just wait and hope they lose interest. The good news is that you're still here." I could hardly be heard. "That means they haven't taken you yet." We sat in silence for hours till the sun came up. Jonas made me a steaming cup of strong, bitter coffee without saying anything. As the morning drove the darkness away, he walked me back towards the road, both of us cautious and continually looking at the woods. We looked at each other, knowing what had caused the destruction, and Jonas gave me a gentle shoulder clap as we climbed towards higher ground to find signal, finally calling. My truck was exactly where I'd left it, but now it was completely torn apart, doors ripped open, tires shredded, engine gutted violently. In order to assist, he drew me aside before I left. "Whatever you do," he said solemnly, "don't come back here. Don't tempt fate twice," I vowed, meaning every word. However, as the rescue truck drew closer, I became aware of something unsettling. There were hours of that night that I still couldn't explain. And even Jonas, with all his warnings, couldn't account for that lost time. I silently boarded the rescue truck and looked again at Jonas's cabin in the background. I knew deep down that whatever had been after me wasn't finished fully. But for the moment, at least, I was making it out alive. 13 years had gone by since that night on Route 212, and life had moved on, as it always does. I buried the incident deep, avoiding talking about it, but the truth about that July night never went away. It was always there, waiting silently beneath the surface. Now, on a steamy August day, I did just that, dulling the edges of what I had experienced until it felt more like a vivid nightmare than a memory. In 2024, I sat with my grown son on the porch, sipping whiskey under the dim glow of the porch lights. It had been a happy evening, with laughter filling the house during my grandson's birthday celebration, and the silence felt calm and comfortable until my son asked a question that I had been secretly dreading for years. I paused, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, and the stillness dragged on awkwardly. My son waited patiently, observing my internal conflict, and at last I took a big breath and looked into the dark beyond our gate. "Do you recall the 2011 4th of July reunion I missed?" I started cautiously, and he nodded. "I told you that the truck broke down, but that wasn't all of it." I went over every detail slowly and meticulously. Digging up, my son listened, silent and focused. The humor of earlier now was back. The crash, the torn engine, the man at the window, the lost hours in the woods, and Jonas's grave warning. Every word felt weighty, like an anchor hauled up from deep waters. He slumped back in his chair and let out a deep breath once I finished. "Why didn't you ever say something sooner?" I confessed that I had been trying for years to convince myself it wasn't real, and telling anyone made it more difficult to pretend, he said gently. "But it did happen. It still haunts me." After a lengthy quiet, I got up and went inside, where I took something I had never discussed with anybody else out of an old box in the attic. I went back to the porch and gently placed the bark in my son's hand, and he squinted, tilting it towards the porch light to read the faded writing. Jonas had given me a small piece of bark, yellowed and curled with age, its edges crumbling, just before I got into the rescue truck, eyes full of a warning I didn't fully understand at the time. My kid stared intently at the words, allowing them to sink in. "Don't call them, don't follow them. If they stop watching you, walk, don't run. Don't think." I shook my head slowly when he eventually asked what he meant by "don't think." "I'm not sure exactly, but it's possible that they distort your perception and cause mental trickery. The less you think about them." We remained in thoughtful silence until he rose up, firmly touched my shoulder, and left me alone with my thoughts and the lingering taste of memories. The more you accept them, the more power they appear to have. I pulled out my phone, fingers shaking a little. I realized then how drastically I'd changed my life after that night, how I'd rerouted deliveries, added hours, sometimes days, and more. I studied the winding route carefully, tracing it with my finger on the screen as I typed Route 212 into the search bar, bringing up satellite images of the highway I'd never drive again. Even now, years later, my throat tightened just looking at it. Onto trips just to avoid that place, but I'd never really told myself why. I sighed deeply, turned off my phone, and got up to look into the darkness. The uneasiness was still there, simmering just below the surface, and I could still clearly remember something Jonas said. They don't let go easily once they see you. As I entered, I paused and made one last turn back towards the yard. Gazing into the darkness beyond our fence, I was convinced deep down that whatever I had come across on Route 212 hadn't been intended to hurt me directly. Instead, they had been interested, curious, but curiosity like that wasn't human, and it wasn't innocent. I carefully locked the back door, checking the latch twice before turning off the lights, leaving the porch in darkness. Upstairs, as I climbed into bed, I knew with grim certainty that the fear I'd carried for 13 years wasn't unfounded. Maybe in the same way a child might examine an insect pinned beneath glass, with lost hours and torn metal, a pale face at the window, and tracks in the ground that shouldn't have been there. It was earned, purchased, and paid for. And when sleep finally drew me in, I was certain of one thing above all else. I would never again walk Route 212. Story for music, you get to know every rise, curve, and patch of grass on those long drives. Montana has a way of lulling you into a quiet sense of routine. So when something breaks that rhythm, it sticks with you. I've been driving rigs for more than 10 years, mostly transporting livestock feed from Great Falls down to Billings. It's steady work, predictable even, and US 87 became a second home for me years ago. Wildfire season had begun, and late summer had been mercilessly dry, with long stretches of grazing land and sagebrush crispy and brown, the sun scorching my windscreen during the day, and the temperature dropping so precipitously in the evening that it sent shivers through the metal doors of my cab. My truck had been a reliable companion. I had taken good care of the big blue Kenworth, and as usual, I kept a small arsenal of protein bars, energy drinks, and my Glock in the glove box. I had only ever reached for it once, at a rest stop outside of Lewistown, when a coyote charged me, and nothing else had ever come close to rattling me until dusk, about 25 miles north of Roundup. Something moved out of the corner of my right eye just off the shoulder, and my first thought was, deer, maybe a pronghorn. I had been driving 4 hours, squinting into the horizon, waiting for the darkness to bring some relief. Only minutes before, I had clicked on my headlights, washing the empty 2-lane road in a dull yellow glow. I thought he might be running from something in the fields behind him, a dog, a rancher, who knew what, but when I looked again, my stomach turned. I saw a man running barefoot and shirtless, as if his life depended on it. My foot instinctively lifted off the accelerator, reducing my speed from 65 to 40. I almost applied the brakes to stop for him, but as my hand hovered over the air horn to indicate that I was pulling over, the man cut sharply right and dove headfirst into me. His eyes were wide and intense, staring straight through the passenger window as if he knew exactly who I was. His muscles were tight, his body bruised all over, his skin streaked with dirt and dried blood, his hair tangled and matted. He looked desperate, hunted. I rode carefully past the sight, my pulse pounding, my eyes scanning the undergrowth, expecting him to spring back out and wave me down, but he never did. The dense grass by the highway. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. The marks implied violence, possibly drug use, possibly difficulty, but what if he was dangerous? What if he needed help? What if someone was after him? A wave of remorse wrenched my stomach. Cell coverage was almost non-existent here, so calling anyone was out of the question. So I swallowed hard, steadied my nerves, and radioed dispatch, but all I got back was crackling static. In any case, the idea of stopping now felt wrong, like stepping into something bigger than I could handle alone. Nerves, and continued to drive. After 15 minutes, My knuckles were still white around the steering wheel, and I was beginning to think that I had imagined the entire situation, when the same man reappeared to my right out of the darkness, running parallel to the truck and precisely matching my speed. Every hair on my body stood on end, and he didn't wave or I slammed the pedal, the engine roaring in protest. But when I ventured to look in the side mirror, he was still there, jogging alongside as easily as before. He simply ran. I set dead ahead, arms pumping methodically, stride even. There was no way no human could keep up with a rig travelling that fast. But there he was, a black shape flickering through the headlight's periphery. Sweat started to form on my brow and in my throat. My rig thundered forward, leaving him, or whatever I had just seen behind in the darkness, and I didn't stop or turn around. Then, as abruptly as he had emerged, he turned sharply and disappeared once again into the shadows beyond the shoulder. Nerves raw, mind still replaying the runner's face. I pushed forward, heart hammering against my ribs, eager to get away from Roundup, but I knew deep down that the night wasn't done with me yet. Arriving at the truck stop on South Billings Boulevard felt like entering the first safe area I'd seen in hours. Even at this late hour, the distant drone of idling engines and whispered voices over by the petrol pumps provided comfort, and I parked the rig, turned off the engine, and leaned back in my seat to take a deep breath. Bright overhead lights created pools of white across the cracked pavement, making the entire place glow unnaturally in the darkness. To grab a snack and nap in my sleeper cab, but something seemed wrong. For the past 20 meters, a subtle but persistent vibration had been bothering me. Perhaps I had struck something earlier and hadn't realized it. Potholes or road debris. I wasn't taking any chances after tonight, so I grabbed my gloves, went under my seat for the torch and jumped out of the cab. The cool night air made my skin tingle as I walked around the rig, shining the beam down the trailer tires, which were normal. Something was trapped under the truck's chassis, just above the rear axle, and when the beam struck it, I felt a chill run down my spine. A knotted clump of black hair hung from one of the mounts, and I drew in closer, hoping it may be animal fur. My pulse accelerated as I knelt down. The hair felt wrong between my fingers, like a violation, and I instinctively flicked it onto the pavement and stared at it, my pulse hammering, but I knew better the moment I pulled it loose. It was long and coarse, and definitely human. My stomach lurched, and I scurried back from under the truck, breathing shallowly through clenched teeth. The bruised runner flashed through my head again, but I'd never felt any kind of collision. Still disturbed, I went back towards the cab, suddenly aware of the truckers loitering about the pumps, watching me. How in the world had human hair gotten trapped there? Had I hit someone? Sleep came reluctantly as I tossed and turned in the sleeper cab, unable to find slumber, before forcing a casual wave, climbing back into my seat, unlocking the door. The hair was in the beam of my headlights, a dark clump stark against the cracked asphalt. Every little sound outside, like the crunch of gravel under my boots or the distant slam of a truck door, woke me up again. I sat up twice, convinced that someone had brushed past my rig, but each time the window showed nothing but silence and empty pavement, so morning couldn't arrive any time soon. Enough said. I stretched my tense muscles at first light, eager to get over the night, when I noticed something reddish-brown and dried spread along the rear bumper. A sinking dread twisted inside my chest. I immediately went into the cab, slammed the door shut, and started the engine. The constant rumble seemed consoling now, like protection. Blood, dry and unmistakable, caked onto the steel in irregular streaks. It hadn't been there yesterday. As I drove away from the truck stop and headed north towards my house, I silently vowed that I would never again stop in Roundup. Whatever was going on, there was now someone else's problem. My rig roared down the highway, and this time I didn't look at the grass by the side of the road. I'll better left unseen. 2 days went by, but the feeling of dread remained, clinging to me, poisoning every quiet moment, shadowing every thought. I tried to hide it under household chores, garage cleanup, and tuning up my old pickup, but nothing could take away the memory of that bruised runner or the hair twisted around the axle. Around lunchtime on the second day, my phone buzzed with an unknown local number, and I paused for a moment before answering, bracing myself. Is this Sam Weller? I began to wonder if I should have mentioned it to the sheriff, or at least mentioned it to someone else, but I didn't know how to explain without coming across as crazy. Deputy Harris from the Muscles County Sheriff's Office said in a gruff voice. I felt my chest tighten. Yeah, I said. You called dispatch about something 2 nights ago. There was a strange person jogging along US 87 near Roundup. Is that right? The guy appeared to be in poor shape and was running barefoot, which didn't seem natural. We need to talk to you about that. Where are you now? Home in Lewistown. Why? What happened? He cleared his throat. There was a heavy, unpleasant pause on the line. Yesterday morning, we received a call from a rancher who reported finding a man alive in a culvert along the highway north of Roundup. The man had a piece of chain still fastened to his ankle and claimed that someone had beaten him when he attempted to flee from a pit. He then managed to break free and attempted to flag down passing cars. I leaned against the kitchen counter to calm myself because my throat felt like sandpaper. The constable confirmed that he was shackled to his ankle, saying, "Looks like he was kept underground. Pretty poor shape. We're trying to piece together how long he was outside." I recalled the bruises and the frantic look of the runner who had gazed through my passenger window. I felt sick once more. Pay attention, Sam, the constable went on softly. He said he saw a blue rig, a scimitar, going south twice, and that he tried to wave you down. But he assumed you didn't see him. I saw him, I said gently, feeling guilty, but he kept vanishing. He never. You didn't see anyone else nearby? Another car? Well, you weren't the only one who passed him by. Believe me, he replied. We just need to make things clear. You waved, never yelled, simply ran. Something suspicious? No, it was just him. There were no strange signs of contact. My throat constricted once more as I imagined the dark, matted hair under my axle mount. My heart was racing in my ears as I visualized the dried blood smears on my bumper. No, I lied. Nothing. Another silence, just long enough to make me question whether the constable believed me. He groaned at the end. All right. If we have any more queries, we'll get in contact. Sam, be careful out there. You too, I whispered as I hung up, leaning hard on the countertop with my hands up and my breath ragged, sweating. Every instinct told me that I had escaped something terrible, that something very real and human was happening along that highway, something worse than any nightmare I have ever dreamed of. That night, as darkness stretched far across my driveway, I worked quietly, installing a dash-mounted camera in the rig's cab and a powerful spotlight bar. The highway had always been my comfort zone and lifeline, but that night it felt different, scary, and unpredictable. My hands trembled a little as I tightened the nuts, and every turn of the wrench was a silent promise to myself. I knew I'd drive again, but never through Roundup, never along that section of US 87. The rumors would circulate among truckers, whispered at diners and rest stops, don't stop or slow down close to Roundup. For anything, most importantly, if you spot a runner by the side of the road, never look back, keep your foot down, and keep your eyes forward.